morning, everyone, or afternoon or evening, whenever you might be listening to this. I'm Kristen. This is Guy. We run an agency called Custom Influence, and about once a month now, we're sitting down just talking about B2B social, B2B marketing, influencer marketing, what's on our mind. So we thought we'd jump into a few of those topics today. Format is I'll be asking Guy some questions, but then I'll be chiming in as well. We'll both workshop what we're seeing from clients, what we're reading. And I think these conversations are good if you're somebody out there who wants to learn more around social and thought leadership, influencer marketing and B2B, etc. So we'll get started.
Before we get into our regular chat, there's something that came up I saw it on LinkedIn through one of the creators in our network, Aidan, who his thing is street interviews and entrepreneurship and wage transparency and looking at how, particularly in London, what people are doing job-wise, their roles, etc., and how they get paid for it. And he was invited to a creator breakfast at 10 Downing Street yesterday. And then I did a bit of research and saw that a couple of other creators had posted about it. I just found it really interesting that actually, government at that level is now, inviting these people in, to really understand and get under the skin of, entrepreneurship around social media, building brands, personal brands, and kind of leveraging that world to create a career for yourself. And when I spoke to you about it yesterday, you said you'd seen something about that it happened in America, and maybe this was kind of a wave of something that's happening.
Yeah, I think it's time for governments to get creators involved in many conversations. I think it was summertime last year, maybe August. In the US, there was a creator economy conference, slightly different to maybe what you're talking about here. I think it was more around support for creators and creators as business owners, what issues affect them and more from an industry perspective. This one seemed a bit more like a closed focus group almost between government and creators in specific areas. But as I said, I think it's really it's
almost a sign of the times.
Yeah, it's a sign of the times that creators need to be working with government in the same way that government works with the press, and speaks to the press. And it's really fascinating, I think, particularly because one of the areas that happened yesterday, or was it yesterday? Yeah, happened yesterday was a focus on entrepreneurship. Obviously, what we do at Custom Influence, we work with creators who touch on that subject. So it's just, it's really good news. I think it's exciting. Yeah. I want to see more from government working with creators in all respects. So really cool cool news story.
We'll try and get. We'll ask Aidan for a bit more information on maybe what went down on the day, and see if he can maybe respond to this post.
And we can link to some of the posts sharing coverage of that event. I think within the event it was closed, so I didn't think there was cameras or content being filmed, but there's some posts on LinkedIn covering it. Yeah. I think there's some posts on LinkedIn just covering it, so we'll link those in the show notes. Cool. Well, okay, let's get down to more, less, I guess, of the day news, more general shifts, trends, and influencer marketing for B2Bs right now, industry stuff. So first thing I wanted to touch on was just the size of the different influencers, creators, followings that we work with or that B2B should work with. I think this comes up a lot. And how when the topic of who do you want to choose to work with, who should you partner with comes up, there's always this question of how big should their following be, within one platform? Do they have other platforms? How do you view the size of a creator in B2B's followership and how that should inform strategy?
Yeah, it's almost like, does size matter in this space?
Yeah.
And I think, yes, to a point. And I think probably when we started out, we probably thought it was really important. It was like, right, if you haven't got the numbers, and if you haven't got the following, then who are you speaking to? But actually, when you look at the audiences that are being built up, sometimes they're in such super niche areas that actually you don't need to be speaking to 100,000 people to be able to make a difference in a sector. You need to have the ear of the right people.
Yeah, I think it's completely sector dependent too. It's like, what space are you in? B2B is so broad. This is one of the things that makes it difficult to provide best practice. I think sometimes when, as an agency, we're working across, huge sectors, let's say like marketing or media, people that work in marketing media,
pharmaceutical,
or we're working in really niche parts of biotech, right? So the size of the thought leaders following is going to vary widely.
It's totally determined by the sector.
Yeah.
But aligned to that, even if you've got a small but perfectly formed audience, then it's about how much engagement or how embedded is that person in their community. Because there's one thing having a following, and then there's one thing actually having a community. And I think we're seeing a big difference, and we see the difference in the results from when you have someone. A good example, I think, is the pretty little marketer, who's built a following, but then she's built a community. So it's very much around people signing up and having membership to that
resource, actual resources, not just updates.
Absolutely.
Yep.
It's so much more than that, and it expands into in real life events. It takes it out of just the social media mix and takes it into something so much bigger.
She does have a big following, but it doesn't have to be,
But that following is not just a following, is it?
Yeah.
It's more. She's grown something, and I think that's quite a big differentiator. And I think that's where smart creators, smart thought leaders, etc., over the next 2, 3, 4 years will look to build on, because that's where it gets really interesting. And it's not necessarily about the commercialization of it or the ability to work with brands. It's about the value that they're giving back to that following and turning that into a community that is actually really doing something interesting in a particular sector. And whether that sector is manufacturing, whether that is biotech, or whether that is ESG, whatever that looks like, a lot of the time it's run by that person's purpose. So it's their drive, their vision, their purpose, and people are getting behind that, and they want to be part of that club, community, following, tribe, whatever you want to call it. But that's when it gets interesting, I think, because not just for the following, but also for brands to be like, great, okay, we've got someone who is aligned to our brand, and we can work with them in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I think overall, it's follower count is kind of a vanity metric. It's more how deep is the relationship that person has with their audience? Are their audience engaged consistently? Have they built a community? And look at that as a way to evaluate who a good partner is, rather than just numbers alone, or metrics alone. You've got to take both numbers as well as your gut instinct when you're looking at these things. You touched a little bit on, leading with purpose and purpose over promotion. I think that's big in influencer marketing, particularly in B2B, where it can never really be a buy now message or do a demo now or do this now. It's just not how it works for most software companies, for most B2B businesses. What do you think the benefits are of running a campaign for any B2B that's leading with purpose over promotion. And I guess maybe you can touch on that more broadly or specific to working with influencers on that purpose over promotion piece.
I think it ties into the ability to create what you would term as very authentic thought leadership, because that's what the influencers are building their value proposition on. It's that trust that's built into what they're saying, doing, how they're interacting with the sector, but then also with their audience and following. And then, I think the ideal scenario for a brand within a sector is to align themselves or work with the people who are, banging the drum for that sector, but in using thought leadership to do it. So very much not about, whether it's advertising based or promotional based. It's around content. Trusted content, becoming a trusted
Helpful,
source,
useful content.
being
That's
an expert.
That's for me. If I look at myself as more of a consumer or a B2B decision maker in my own industry, anything that's helpful and useful to me has purpose. Anything that's overly salesy isn't that helpful, right? And I think looking at influencer partnerships or thought leadership partnerships, if you do it right, the value it drives is so much more beneficial than like you issue a press release. We've done this. It's very factual. It's not applicable to that person's everyday life. So it needs to have some usefulness to it.
What's interesting actually is like, when you said that, and we have these conversations all the time with clients, they're like, oh, I get given my press release, I get given my white paper release, and I've got to, tack it on to get everyone to repost it, etc. The thing is that is totally and utterly forgettable. It is.
Yeah.
It is. They know it. The audience knows it. It's done.
It's just a tick box.
It's just done.
This is what we've
It's just
done.
done.
So this is what we're going to do.
Yeah, and a conversation I was having yesterday with a client was like, okay, what does good look like in this space? How do I go from that scenario, which they knew they were in, to how do we move this forward? And it's like, well, actually, it's creating best fit content for that platform and utilizing. Whether it is utilizing an influencer or using in-house, but then, actually having that on a consistent basis, having that over, whether it's every month, every quarter, etc., almost like a hero piece of content that, as a brand, you can hang your hat on and say, right, we know this sector inside out.
Yeah, or you can establish a point of view, like I think there's
people know what you stand for.
Exactly. There is a company that we're working on a program with right now in financial services, right? And there's some new regulation coming out. And so that's a good example of, they know these regulations are coming out. So they're running a campaign with an influencer to develop their point of view on this regulation, but also support people that have to make changes in their business as a result of this regulation. So again, it's what is the purpose of this campaign? How can we help and support
the community,
professionals, the sector, through this activity, through this content, whatever it is.
And that's what gets remembered.
Yes.
The value the value that brand has brought to the table gets way more remembered than the fact that there's a PR release about
a product update that helps,
or someone who's joined the board,
yeah.
and that's great. That needs to be done. That's hygiene. But if all your marketing is hygiene, then it's going to get washed away.
Yeah, exactly. So it's the difference between that campaign around supporting with an upcoming regulation with an influencer that has their point of view. You have your own internal point of view as a brand, That's memorable compared to, hey, we have a product release. This feature update is going to help with this regulation coming in. You see, it's a different way of looking at it, and one's definitely more memorable than the other. Okay, moving on from that. So you mentioned a little bit about trust previously in the other topics we looked at. Why do you think independent voices help build trust? There's a lot of stats. In our last conversation, we covered some of those stats on 75% of B2B decision makers are more likely to trust a brand if if there's a endorsement by an industry expert, these kind of stats. Why do you think really that is beyond the stats? Like, what do you think the reasons are?
I think it's one is the independence that a thought leader in a sector has got. But because they're not aligned they're aligned to themselves. They've created their audience off of their own
personal brand industry expertise.
Exactly. So that they've built that. That's kind of just baked in as that's them. That's why people follow them. But also on a bigger level, I think we're bombarded with messages, whether they're real or unreal, around misinformation, around disinformation, around the mainstream media not saying this and the traditional media saying that. And whether that is correct or incorrect, dependent on what way you lean and also probably what country you're in, it's a thing. And I think actually a lot of people are searching for the truth, and they're kind of like, where do I find an unbiased comment? Where do I find, and whether that is professionally or personally, whether that's your news, your politics, or your business or your company, I think people are desperate to who do I speak to who's going to give me the goods? Who's going to be real.
And you know what I think for creators, influencers, thought leaders on the brand partnership side. So you could say all that, but then you say, oh, but there's, these influencers still endorsing brands. True, right? That's true. But what I always think about...
But that's not the core of their content.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's not, what I always think is, even if there is a brand partnership in place, you could say, oh, well, that's biased. But from an influencer or creator's perspective, they're going to have to trust that brand enough to partner with them. And that alone should say, okay, well, to me, again, this is my personal opinion, if they trust them enough to do that partnership or look into that research or run that webinar, do that demo, if they trust that company enough, I'm not saying that the audience on the other end is going to say, oh, yeah, definitely, I need to have a look at that. But they will say, oh, yeah, that's interesting enough for maybe me to learn about them. It's an extension of that person's trust in that brand. That
it's extending it to the brand. Yeah.
It extends it a little bit out to the audience,
giving them air cover.
Yeah, maybe I should have a look too. Yeah. Perfect example for me on that front is SEMrush, right? Genuinely have not ever used SEMrush, right? But I've seen a lot of brand partnership activity within the past couple months, like influencer engagements. Most recently was for a conference they did. And again, I still haven't, made the jump. I haven't demoed the platform, but I've thought at some point I really want to dig into it.
When the need arises.
Yeah. When I float into that 5%, the
You're
magic
in the 95.
5%. Yeah, I'm in the 95.
You're going to make it to the 5 someday.
Yeah, I remain there. But again, it's those messages that I've seen from their conference and from stuff online where I've thought
people you rate online who are talking about it and maybe doing tutorials, etc. But yeah, you're right. When the time's right. Just on that note, though, the amount of conversations we've had with creators, influencers, thought leaders, etc., and we've put forward does this brand has got a campaign that they think could be right for you. What do you think? It isn't I'll do it at all.
Yeah,
at all. And I think that's maybe a misconception because actually the amount of times we have to do double the amount of work.
Yeah, the back and forth.
Because 50% of the people we talk to go, that doesn't feel right for me, or
I just need more information.
or I've never used that product.
Yeah.
You know, there's a couple of creators we work with who they will not do anything unless they've actually used the tool, have been a consumer or buyer of the product or service, have had experience of it. So, and that's totally that's kind of perfect, because it's like
If they
you're going to get the real. They want to endorse the stuff that they believe in, and you're going to get a far better. You're going to get a far better piece of content created if you're working with people who believe in it, understand it,
or can understand it. Now, there's certain companies that we've worked with where not every creator, influencer, thought leader, whatever, has been a super user of that product, but can they get their head around it? Is it in their, you know,
it's in their wheelhouse.
It's in their wheelhouse. They get it. Yeah, that's the important thing. So yeah, for anybody out there, I think that often wonders, that's such a good point, and maybe some of these things we never bring up. You know, it's not an automatic yes from these people. Like outreach, these discussions that you have to have.
Sometimes it's not even a reply.
Yes, you know, sometimes it's a reply, then not a reply. You know, it is an ongoing conversation that happens. From the very first message to right before content goes live, right? Yeah. So there's a lot involved. And if there isn't a lot involved, that's when maybe I would be a bit more concerned. You know, the people that you're working with. From the brand side, it's trust both ways, right? You should be able to trust that individual, and the individual should be able to trust the brand, right? It has to be equal in that way for it to really work, I think. Yeah. Okay, next one, and I think this is something we've seen change in this year, tail end of last year, is around when and how B2B companies run influencer marketing strategies. So do you think we'll see more companies start having this always on approach as the year continues?
100%.
Okay.
Seeing it now. 2 conversations had in this month. This week, were they were totally opposite to, say, if we went back 12 months, they were like, right, how do we, you know, I want an activation to start, and I want an influencer marketing strategy activation starting in April, and I want to run it for my financial year. Which we would never have had that conversation before, and the reason being is because the person I'm speaking to kind of gets it. It isn't that they've done tons of it before, it's just they understand that the shift in their audience and how their audience is assessing platforms, tech, vendors in their space. They can see it's moved in the last 2-3 years to social focus. So
I think that's a broader trend across B2B social. One of my notes or thoughts around this was that it's employee advocacy is kind of going through the same advancement right now. It's kind of like whether there's influential people within your company, at your company, or whether it's partnering with people externally that have a point of view. I think social media doesn't stop. It doesn't take breaks. So neither can brands afford to, really. It's kind of got to be, it doesn't have to be always on, but it has to be strategic and consistent. I think
and longer than one post.
Yeah, and longer than one post for sure.
Yeah.
And maybe that means, like, more practically, maybe that means you have a piece of content that comes out quarterly. And so along with that, you plan for influencers or thought leaders to cover that content consistently. So maybe it is one or 2 posts just on that piece of content or that piece of research. Maybe it's a number of people, but 1 post each. But again, it's looking at it strategically. How many people should we work with in more niche sectors? It could just be 1 person. That's one campaign we're running for a sustainability consultancy at the moment. It's working with one person. He's going to have a look at a piece of their research, and he's going to give his point of view every quarter. And that's, that's something that they as a small team can handle. That influencer creator is not asking him to do more than makes sense for him to do. So yeah, I think it's the longer term thinking is going to become, more commonplace as we move into the year.
Yeah, the example you put there it is traditional content marketing, but with the added benefit of an influencer and an audience connecting to that content marketing right off the bat. So instead of just going, oh, I've done some content marketing, great. What are you going to do with it? Who's going to see it? Where do you place it? Where does it live?
Also,
and that's always been almost the issue for a lot of agencies who are in that space. It's like, right, unless they've got a setup where they can, start putting that content in the right places, sometimes that content gets
lost.
It just gets made. It gets made, and then it's like, right, great, that's done. Nice one.
Another tick box exercise.
Or it becomes internal.
And
or it becomes sales literature, and it doesn't actually live outside of the company.
Yeah, and I think with boosting posts, LinkedIn thought leader ads, and almost influencer content becoming, or posts becoming now like a paid ad, that will also help companies take what could have been just one isolated moment or post and make that
extend
it has a longer shelf life, reach more people, etc. So yes, we're moving long term, genuinely. Whereas a year ago we were kind of like, we want people to be thinking that this can be a bit more long term, but I think we're there now.
Just because we know it works better.
Absolutely for everybody, right? Yeah. Okay, so now let's move on to some industry questions before we close out. So I want to focus on cybersecurity. We've done a lot in cybersecurity, so wanted to narrow it down and talk a little bit about it. So first question is, why do you think using like external people and external influencers are particularly helpful for spaces like cybersecurity?
That whole space is built on trust and protection. So,
and like what the latest thing is.
And keeping up to date. If we think of like last year, there was, in terms of campaigns that we worked on, that was built around things that happened in a certain day or week. If we think of the blue screen MS outage. Yeah,
we did some activity there.
There was those hacks into certain, I think there was an NHS hack, but it seems to happen every month. But yeah, it's being able to work with someone that can be really nimble, I think, and agile around content. So when that MS outage happened, I spoke to the client we were working with. I said, look, this is huge, some of your products and services wrap into how you would be able to defend yourself against it or have a solution. And within 2 days, we had a full-blown article, newsletter, post set up from one of the leading UK cybersecurity influencers with their branding attached to it, their solution, interview with the...
it's the turnaround
It's the
time,
turnaround.
Right?
It's being able to get out there straight away with trust, with someone who is leading in that sector, that makes sense for you to align yourself with.
Yeah, for me, cybersecurity is so opinionated. It's so it's one of those spaces that lives on social. Updates are happening constantly. Threats, company product updates, the way that cyber teams are working with executives and within an organization is constantly changing. And so there's just so much going on. And I think there's some really great voices in that space too, which is something that we've discovered, running the campaigns and working with the clients that we've worked with. I think shout out to people like Graham Cluley runs a fantastic podcast. Ashish Rajan, another podcaster, but also content creator, really interesting guy. Jane Franklin.
MBA.
MBA now. So yeah, there's more people. I think that's my other point on cyber is there's more people out there across social platforms too. It's not just LinkedIn. There's a huge community of cyber voices on YouTube, Substacks as well. There's a guy out of the US called Daniel Meisler, I want to say, runs a huge Substack called Unsupervised Learning. And yeah, opportunities to work with those people, partner with those people are just really interesting and of the moment, I think. What do you think? So I guess closing out on and touching on cyber again is, what do you think the best ways to align with an influencer are if you're a cybersecurity company, like what's the way to approach partnership?
It will depend on the influencer, but I think where there's the opportunity to really collaborate on a joint piece of work that is talking about what is happening within the sector in a given time period, whether that's quarterly, and then getting them to really engage their audience around it. And what we've found that's worked really well, and because that community is opinionated and is actually very well educated, running things like what has worked really well in some of the campaigns is running polls at the outset to really get a kind of gauge the temperature around whether it's something that's gone on or whether it's a new solution, not brand specific, but almost market specific, sector specific, getting that data back from the audience and then building or crafting content around that. So you're almost giving back the audience what they're already validating that this is something you've
important.
Asked them.
Yeah.
So you're almost starting a conversation. It's less about broadcast. It's about a conversation.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think starting off with that kind of focus and then building content around it. A lot of the influencers we've name checked are they don't just have LinkedIn, they have YouTube channels, they have podcasts, they have newsletters. So there's so many channels that they can reach an audience or their audience on. Being able to co-create content and then seed that out, I think is we've seen it work. It just works really well because actually, the audience wants to engage with great content.
Yeah, and I think just, again, note to anybody listening out there, just in terms of how this works in practice, not every voice in every space is going to have the same package or the same opportunities. Not every podcaster is going to allow paid for guests or partnership guests. It might be in some cases a host-read ad. You just kind of have to look at each opportunity individually and say what makes sense. And there's also working, again, you might want to work at with one individual, but work with them on multiple channels. Maybe wrap in your event marketing again, cybersecurity, whether it's an in real life event, conference, or a virtual event. Is there a way to incorporate that person? Maybe it's having them guest on an event that you host, or maybe it's them filming some content of an event that you're at as a brand or sponsoring or speaking at. So loads of opportunities there. I think it's maybe about, looking at what you're doing currently, finding out who some of those voices are that resonate with your brand, with the things you're talking about, and then looking at the specifics of what actually is possible in terms of deliverables or a plan. But take the time to do that plan, right? The planning, I would say, again, we're almost out of time now here, but I would say the planning in any campaign should take the majority of your time rather than briefing people in the approvals and the things going live and the reporting. It really plan it right from the outset and make sure everything you're doing makes sense for everybody involved, and that's how things are going to work the best. Anything else to close out on for cyber, around anything more specifically before we close?
I don't think so. I think it feels the only thing I'm thinking at the moment is just it feels very things are really starting to move in terms of the space. We're getting a lot more inbound calls to come and pitch for work and to have conversations. So yeah, it just feels like a good time in this space at the moment. So long may long may it continue. And spring has
Spring
sprung.
is springing, so
sprung.
that always helps too. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for listening. If you have been listening till the end, if you have any questions about running campaigns yourself, influencers, the creator economy for B2B, reach out to us. We're always a DM away, and we'll see you next time.